Hi again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and today I want to show you a slightly different propagation technique for plants. This one called single node cutting. I'll be showing it on this plant here, Salvia Caradonna. Let me give you a close-up of the plant and also show you the technique. Panning upwards here, it is the woodland sage in the background here with those tall violet spikes. That is our current subject of propagation. It's called Salvia Caradonna. It is winter hardy, repeat blooming, and just generally very healthy and vigorous in the garden, making it a wonderful garden plant and definitely why I'd like to propagate it. In fact, you can see that I've already tried by this clump here. This is the tall clump behind it, but this one I took down about 3 weeks ago to try to get some cuttings off of it. But it's very awkward, and the reason why is if you can look at the stems here and get you a close-up view, there's a lot of distance between one set of leaves and the next, making it kind of an awkward subject for traditional cutting methods. So a little bit of definition so I can show you the concern. This spot here where the leaves come out, right there, and there, that's called a node, and the node is the spot on the plant where it's most likely, if you took a cutting, to make brand new roots. Now, my traditional advice when I'm talking about taking stem cuttings is to leave on 2 or 3 nodes. So you'd have the one on the bottom, at least one on the top, and then maybe one in the middle as well. But if I did a 3-node cutting on this plant here, what I'm going to end up with is a long piece like this, which is a lot longer than I traditionally do for my propagation. Might even be too long to fit under the humidity dome in some circumstances here. And what I've ended up with when I took my cuttings 3 weeks ago is a tray that looks funny, like this one here, and it's super tall compared to, and let me just pan over here so you can see, compared to my more normal cuttings that look a lot like this. Very short, very compact, and even so, still have 2 and sometimes 3 nodes on them. This one has one on the top, one in the middle, one on the bottom, because the length between one set of leaves and the next is quite short compared to the salvia that you see over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try something a little bit different, and the different thing that I'll be trying goes a little bit like this. I'm going to go with a single node cutting. So I'm going to cut it just below the node, like that there, and then I'm going to cut it kind of directly above the node. And this will be my cutting, and you can see how small that is. And in comparison to what I normally do with cuttings, this is minute. It's the closest thing I'm going to get to micropropagation or tissue culture within doing stem cutting. So let's give that a try. I'm going to stick a bunch like that and see how they do. Can it work with just 1 node at the bottom and no nodes up above that? All right, well, I'm going to get to it here and start preparing some cuttings like this for this tray over here. And you can see, again, big long node there, but I'm not going to have to maintain the whole node here. I'm just going to cut it just below a node and then just above the node. So now we'll have these cuttings prepared here. And what that means, in terms of why I would do this, is because, well, number one, these cuttings over here are a little bit awkward. I think they're kind of doing okay, like rooting okay. And I can see one here, and this is again from 2 to 3 weeks ago. It's got some initial rooting across the bottom there. So it seems like they're doing okay, but you can see that, again, super long there. So one of the reasons I would hesitate to do it this way is because one of the traditional things you want on a perennial is branching down low. And this immediately makes a tall plant with its first kind of node, or the first above ground node, way up here. So you could, I guess, bury it a little bit deeper, but that's not ideal either. So you're not going to get a low down branched plant by doing this. The second thing, and the second reason I would do this, is because I can get more cuttings from the same stem here. You can see I'm skipping the internode section here, but I'm using every node to make cuttings instead of having to sacrifice 2 or 3 different nodes. And that can be useful, again, if you have limited stock, to be able to get many cuttings off of a very small amount of stem. And now that I have a few of them cut and ready to go here, I'm going to go ahead and stick them, and I'm just going to trim the leaves off enough so that they're not interfering with each other's neighbors in the next cell over. So I've given it a little dip in rooting hormone there, and then just pressed it into the soil there. Doesn't have to go super deep. In fact, it can't go super deep because there's not a lot of cutting there. Once again, just going to trim the ends of the leaves so they don't interfere with each other. and then pressed into the next cell there. I'm going to go ahead and fill up this tray, and then we'll have a look in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and I'll give you the results. I am going to do this inside, or move this inside. Despite the fact that it is almost the first week of June, it is still too inconsistent in temperatures and sunlight outdoors, and I get better control inside my grow room. So I'll move it in there, and then we'll come back and look at the results. These cuttings have been under the humidity dome now for 2 weeks. I just pulled them out yesterday because I started to feel pullback, and pullback is an indication that there's some rooting. So I want to actually work some of these out of their little cells and see what is the extent of the rooting. I'm going to give it a little squeeze underneath here just to loosen it up and see if I can pull that whole plug out if the rooting has gone to the sides of the plug. And that seems to have done the trick, and there we go. So in about 2 weeks, I got some really decent rooting on this here, just from that single node there. And it feels like, as I look at the other ones here, like that's pretty widespread within the tray. I got this one here, doesn't seem to have done it yet. I see some callousing across the base of it, but other ones, I'm getting that strong pullback from the base. So a little inconsistent across the tray. I want to get you some close-ups of some of these here that look like what they've done, and I'll see if I can get you a real close-up of this, is that it didn't have good contact with the soil, so it calloused up above the soil and then sent roots straight down. So it's kind of dangling here by roots from one side of the cutting. So I guess one takeaway from that is that if you're doing those single node cuttings, they don't stay nestled into the soil quite so easily as a longer cutting does. You got to take some pains to make sure that they do have really good soil contact. Maybe I'll wrap up by making a comparison between these, the single node cuttings that were taken a couple weeks ago, and these, the double node cuttings, one at the bottom, one at the top, that were taken well before that. And you can see that is a respectable plant, good rooting on it, but what it's doing is it's resuming growth right at the very top end there of the second node, which means that I've got this kind of stretch already when I'm looking at the perennial once I pot it. Now, you may notice that something like this here is actually sending new shoots from the base as well, probably because it had a little problem at the top. So there is a chance that if I cut some of these off later here, that I could resume them with some growth at the base. But with the single node cuttings, I get that kind of growth right away, right from the start. So I think this is probably a better solution. I would venture to say that they probably rooted a little bit quicker, because these are almost caught up with these ones, and these ones were taken long before that. So I would say it's a viable propagation technique, at least for this. I haven't tried it on roses and other things that I produce more frequently, so that might be the next step in this little experiment.